The point defense systems on these museum pieces were designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The point defense systems on these museum pieces were designed to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. And Ambassador Chun watched as their full meaning settled over the assembled delegates. You attacked our war museum. Several species began accessing their data networks, pulling up information about human history and military development. The Varelian ambassador's eye stalk swiveled rapidly as she read something on her personal display, and her skin color shifted from calm blue to alarmed orange. Ambassador Krelix recovered his composure first, though his scales still showed traces of that ashen pallor, museum or not. Your vessels fired upon Imperial forces, he insisted. When his voice lacked its earlier certainty, this still constitutes an act of war. Self-defense is not an act of war. Chun countered. Your forces fired first on civilian vessels in neutral space. She gestured to the holographic displays, still showing the combat footage. Furthermore, those civilian vessels attempted to communicate for 7 full minutes before your attack began. 7 minutes in which your forces ignored all hails on all standard frequencies. Chancellor Von Eth raised his appendages again, calling for order before the chamber could descend into chaos once more. This matter is clearly more complex than initially presented, he announced. I propose a recess of 2 standard hours to allow all parties to consult with their governments and prepare additional evidence. Agreed, Chun said. Immediately Krelix hesitated, then nodded. The Xyloth Empire agrees to this recess. As delegates began filing out toward the various diplomatic lounges and communication facilities, Chun made her way to the human delegation's secure conference room. It was a modest space compared to what the older galactic powers commanded, but it served humanity's current needs. Her assistant, Marcus Torres, was already inside with 3 other members of the diplomatic team. That went better than expected, Marcus said as Chun entered. The look on Krelix's face when you told him he attacked museum ships was priceless. This isn't about humiliating the Xyloth, Chun replied, settling into a chair and accepting the cup of tea that another aide offered. We need to de-escalate this situation before it turns into something worse. Earth Command sent new instructions, Marcus said, sliding a data tablet across the table. Fleet Admiral Okonkwo wants us to present our formal response if the Council doesn't rule in our favor. Chun read through the message, her expression growing more troubled with each line. They can't be serious, she muttered. 200 vessels? 312, actually, Marcus corrected. Fleet Command ran the calculations based on proportional response doctrine. He pulled up a complex mathematical model showing force multiplication factors, casualty estimates, and strike timelines for the destruction of 3 vessels and the deaths of 47 civilians. Proportional military response would authorize neutralization of 89 Xyloth military installations, Marcus explained. Estimated casualties on their side would be approximately 2 million, give or take. And the timeline? Chun asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. 14 hours from authorization to complete military objectives. Marcus confirmed. Chun set down her teacup, her hand not entirely steady. That's insane. That's proportional, Marcus replied. The Xyloth killed 47 of our people, civilian historians and teachers. Under galactic law, we have the right to respond with equivalent force. Equivalent would be 47 of their civilians, Chun argued, not 2 million military personnel, equivalent to the attack on 3 vessels. Marcus clarified, look, I don't like it either, but these are the rules the galactic community established long before humanity arrived. He gestured to the legal document scrolling across his display. Article 47 of the Galactic Treaty allows for proportional military response to attacks on civilian vessels. The calculation is based on vessel tonnage, military capability of the attacking force, and intent. Chun rubbed her temples, feeling a headache building behind her eyes. And we're going to present this to the council? Only if necessary, Marcus assured her. Admiral Okonkwo was very clear. This is a last resort. We offer the diplomatic solution first. Formal apology from the Xyloth. Reparations equal to the value of the destroyed vessels. And reaffirmation of human rights to travel through neutral space. And if they refuse? Chun asked. Then we present the alternative. Marcus said grimly back in the council chamber 2 hours later. The atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Many delegates now had stacks of data files on their platforms. Clearly, they had spent the recess researching humanity's history and capabilities. The Varelian ambassador looked particularly disturbed, her skin still showing that alarmed orange coloration. Several of the smaller species had moved their platforms slightly further from both the human and Xyloth delegations, as if physical distance might protect them from whatever was about to unfold. Chancellor Vorneth called the session back to order, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into rainbow patterns across the floor. Ambassador Chun, have you consulted with your government? He asked. I have, Chancellor, Chun confirmed, rising from her seat. And do you have a formal response to present? Yes, Chancellor, she replied. Her voice was steady now, professional and calm, the tone of someone who had made peace with an unpleasant but necessary task. Before I present Earth's official response, I would like to provide the Council with some context. Chun began. She activated her holographic display once more, and a slowly rotating image of Earth appeared above the chamber floor. This is humanity's homeworld, she said. We call it Earth, a planet that our scientists classify as a Class 7 death world. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Death worlds were rare, and intelligent life evolving on them was rarer still. Earth has 1.0 gravitational force, significantly higher than the galactic average of 0.7. Chun continued. It has aggressive microbiology, extreme weather patterns, and until recently was home to numerous predator species that humanity competed with. For survival, images flashed across the display: hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and various predatory animals that had once stalked human ancestors. Humans evolved in an environment of constant threat. Chun explained, we developed persistence hunting, complex tool use, and most critically, sophisticated warfare. New images appeared. Ancient human warriors with spears and shields, medieval knights in armor, industrial-era soldiers with rifles, and finally modern military forces. Human recorded history spans approximately 10,000 years, Chun said, and for approximately 9,900 of those years, we were at war, somewhere on Earth. Humans were fighting other humans. The delegates watched in growing horror as the display showed battle after battle, war after war, the Peloponnesian War, the Mongol conquests, the 30 Years' War, the World Wars, and dozens of others. We fought over resources, ideology, territory, religion, and sometimes simply because we had forgotten why the war started. Chum continued, by the time we developed space travel, Earth's population had survived nuclear weapons, biological warfare, and weapons capable of rendering the entire planet uninhabitable. She paused, letting that sink in. The museum ships that Ambassador Krelix destroyed were from what we call the First Unification Period. Chun explained. That was when humanity finally united Earth under a single government after the Solar Consolidation Wars. Those conflicts lasted 37 years and involved every human settlement, from Earth to the Kuiper Belt. The display showed specifications for the museum ships. weapon systems, armor thickness, power generation, and defensive capabilities. By human standards, these vessels are ancient and obsolete. Chum said, they represent technology that is 200 years old, primitive compared to our current capabilities. She brought up new images, sleek modern human warships bristling with weapons, massive carriers capable of deploying hundreds of fighter craft, and orbital defense platforms. Our current military consists of 847 active vessels across 12 systems. Chum stated, these are our peacetime patrol numbers, the forces we maintain when we are not at war. Chick-style delegate raised a clawed appendage. Ambassador, what are your wartime numbers? The insectoid asked, her translator rendering her clicking speech into Galactic Standard Chun met the delegate's multifaceted eyes. We don't have wartime numbers currently. She replied, humanity hasn't been at war since joining the Galactic Council, but our military doctrine calls for a 10-to-1 expansion ratio if hostilities begin. The mathematical implications rippled through the chamber like a shockwave. 8,000 vessels? Someone whispered, this is unheard of, the Varelian ambassador said, her voice shaking. No species maintains the capability for such rapid military expansion. Most species didn't spend 10,000 years perfecting the art of war. Chun replied quietly, pulled up a comparison chart showing human vessels alongside ships from various other species. Our current patrol craft, what we consider light frigates, outgun the Varelian flagship. She noted, our destroyers have more armor than Celtic battleships. Our carriers can deploy more fighters than the entire Varelian fleet combined. This is preposterous. Ambassador Krelix interjected, though he sounded less certain than before. The Xyloth Empire has the largest military in this sector. Had. Chun corrected gently. Past tense, asterisk? The holographic display showing human military calculations remained suspended above the chamber floor, and every delegate in the massive space stared at those cold, clinical numbers. 2.3 million casualties. 14 hours. Ambassador Krelix had gone completely still, his forearms frozen in whatever gesture he had been making when Chun dropped that calculated apocalypse into his lap. His scales had shifted to colors that Chun's briefing materials indicated were associated with shock and fear among his species. This is madness, whispered the Varelian ambassador, her translator barely picking up the words. No, said a new voice, deep, resonant, and ancient. Everyone turned toward the far end of the chamber where the observer platforms stood. These platforms were reserved for elder species who had graduated beyond active council participation, but maintained the right to witness and occasionally comment on galactic affairs. The speaker was Takmur, the Methulan observer who had served in that capacity for longer than most species had possessed spaceflight. His crystalline body was larger than Chancellor Vorneth and showed the deep fractures and repair patterns of extreme age. This is not madness, Takmur continued, moving forward into the light. This is precedent. He gestured to the human display with 3 of his upper appendages. Article 47 of the Galactic Treaty was written by the founders specifically to allow proportional response to attacks on civilian vessels. The mathematics of the human calculation are correct. With respect, Observer Takmur, the Varelian ambassador interjected, her skin still that alarmed orange. The spirit of Article 47 was never intended to justify such massive retaliation. The spirit of Article 47 was to prevent attacks on civilian vessels. Takmur replied, by making the cost of such attacks prohibitively high. He turned his ancient gaze toward Ambassador Chun. Tell me, Ambassador, your government does not actually wish to execute this military auction, does it? No, Observer Chun replied honestly. Earth Command authorized me to present it as required by treaty law. But our strong preference is for the diplomatic resolution. We came to the stars, hoping to leave war behind. Yet you maintain the capability for war on a scale that dwarfs any current galactic power, Takmur observed. Why? It was a fair question. And Chun had been expecting someone to ask it eventually, because we're not naive. She answered simply, we hope for peace. We work toward peace. We genuinely want peace. But we also remember our history. We know what happens to peaceful civilizations that can't defend themselves when someone else decides to take what they have. She pulled up a new display showing a timeline of human history focused specifically on conquered peoples and fallen civilizations. The Carthaginians were a peaceful, trading civilization, Chun said, highlighting one section. They were destroyed by Rome. The peaceful Buddhist kingdoms of Central Asia fell to the Mongol invasions. The Aztec Empire, the Inca civilization, the Aboriginal nations of Australia all conquered by more militaristic societies. History taught us a hard lesson. Peace is only possible when you're strong enough that others choose not to attack you. So you maintain massive military capabilities despite wanting peace? Asked the Chixtal delegate. We maintain sufficient military capabilities to make attacking us an unappealing option. Chun clarified. There's a difference. Is there? Krelix asked, finally finding his voice again. Your military could conquer half the sector. Good. Yes, Chun agreed. But we won't. How can we trust that? The Xyloth ambassador demanded. Because we had that capability when we joined the Galactic Council 3 years ago. And we've done nothing but trade peacefully and participate in diplomatic forums. Chun replied, because humanity spent 10,000 years fighting ourselves. And we learned that conquest creates more problems than it solves. Because we'd rather spend our resources building museums than warships. She gestured to the images of the destroyed vessels still displayed above them. Those museum ships were taking historical artifacts to teach our children about our past. Chun continued. They were full of weapons that we decommissioned because we don't want to use them anymore. They were crewed by teachers and historians who dedicated their lives to making sure future generations understand the cost of war. Her voice grew quieter, but somehow more intense, and your forces killed them. Killed 47 people, whose only crime was trying to preserve history so it wouldn't be repeated. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Finally, Chancellor Vornath spoke. Ambassador Krelix, the Xyloth Empire must respond to the human offer. Will you accept the diplomatic resolution, or will you face the military alternative? The Xyloth ambassador seemed to age before their eyes, his scales losing their luster as the weight of the decision pressed down on him. I must consult with the Imperial Council. He said slowly. Denied, Vornath said, his voice hard as diamond. The human ambassador presented 2 clear options. You represent the Xyloth Empire in this chamber, and you will make a decision now. Chun watched Krelix carefully, and she saw the exact moment when pride warred with survival, and survival won. The Xyloth Empire, he said, each word seeming to cost him something, accepts the diplomatic resolution. We will issue a formal apology, pay the requested reparations, and reaffirm human rights to travel through neutral space. Relief flooded through the chamber. Like a physical wave, several delegates made gestures of thanksgiving to their various deities, while others simply slumped in their seats. A wise choice, Chancellor Vornath said. This session will adjourn for 1 standard day while the formal agreements are drafted. As delegates began filing out, Chun felt exhaustion wash over her. Marcus appeared at her elbow, guiding her toward their delegation's exit. You did it, he said quietly. You actually pulled it off. We threatened them with overwhelming force. Chun replied, her voice heavy. That's not exactly diplomatic brilliance. You gave them a peaceful way out. Marcus corrected, and you made sure everyone in this chamber understands that humans are not to be trifled with. That's what worries me. Chun admitted as they walked through the crystal corridors toward their conference room. We just painted a target on humanity's back. Every ambitious species now knows we're potentially their biggest rival or their biggest potential ally. Marcus countered, "You can't have it both ways, Chun. Either we're weaklings that anyone can push around, or we're powerful enough to be treated with respect. There's no middle ground in galactic politics." Before Chun could respond, a voice called out behind them, "Ambassador Chun, a moment of your time?" They turned to find Observer Takmer approaching, his crystalline body refracting the corridor lights into patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. "Of course, Observer," Chun said, gesturing for Marcus to wait a few steps away. The ancient Netherland studied her for a long moment with senses that Chun couldn't begin to understand. "You handled that situation with remarkable skill," Takmer said finally, "but I sense you are troubled." "I just threatened to kill 2 million beings," Chun replied quietly. "That's not something I'm comfortable with." "Yet you would have done it if the Xyloth had refused the diplomatic option." Takmer observed it wasn't a question. "Yes," Chun admitted. "If they had chosen war, Earth would have responded. We don't want to, but we will defend our people. Even museum curators and historians, especially them," Chun corrected. "They're the ones keeping our worst memories alive, so we don't forget what we're capable of. Killing them was killing our conscience." Takmer made a sound like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. Chun's translator suggested it was approval. "I think you should know something, Ambassador," the observer said. "The Methulan Concordat has records that span over 400,000 of your years. In that time, we have encountered 6 other species that evolved on high-gravity death worlds similar to Earth." Chun felt a chill run down her spine. "What happened to them?" she asked. 3 became conquerors," Takmer replied. "They spread through the galaxy taking what they wanted until they were destroyed by alliances of the species they had conquered. 2 others chose isolation, rejecting galactic society entirely. They eventually went extinct. We don't know if through war among themselves or other causes. 1 species transcended physical form entirely and now exists in a state we cannot fully comprehend." He paused, his ancient eyes studying Chun's reaction. "Humanity is the 7th such species we have encountered," Takmer continued, "and you are the first to choose integration. The first to join the Galactic Council not because you needed protection or resources, but because you wanted to learn a better way. I'm not sure we're succeeding at that better way," Chun said, thinking of those calculated casualties. "You presented overwhelming force as an option, but hoped it wouldn't be necessary." Takmer replied, "You gave your enemy a face-saving path to peace. You demonstrated both capability and restraint. That is better than any of the previous 6 species managed." He began moving away, then paused. "The Xyloth will honor this agreement, Ambassador," he said. "Not because they fear human military might, though they do, but because you showed them that humanity values peace enough to offer it, even from a position of absolute strength. That is a lesson the galaxy needed to learn after Takmer departed." Chum stood in the corridor for a long moment, processing his words. Marcus approached cautiously. "Everything okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Chun admitted. "I think we just fundamentally changed how the galaxy views humanity." "Is that a bad thing?" "I don't know," she repeated. "Ask me in 100 years when we see how this plays out." Asterisk. The next standard day brought unexpected complications, Ambassador. Chun arrived at the council chamber to find it more crowded than any session she had previously attended. Word of humanity's military capabilities had spread through galactic society like wildfire, and apparently every species with even observer status wanted to witness the formal resolution. "This is unusual," Marcus whispered as they took their positions on the human platform. "I count at least 60 different species represented here. 20 more than yesterday," Chun nodded, scanning the chamber and noting the various new faces or face equivalents among the assembled delegates. Some looked curious, others concerned, and a few showed what her xenopsychology training suggested was outright fear. Chancellor Vornath called the session to order, and the familiar acoustic damping effect silenced all background noise. We convened to formalize the resolution between the Xyloth Empire and the Human-Terran Alliance, he announced. Ambassador Krellix, you have prepared the formal apology? The Xyloth ambassador rose, and Chun noticed that he appeared to have aged even more overnight. His scales were dull, and he moved with less of the imperial confidence he had displayed during their first confrontation. Honored Chancellor, esteemed delegates, Krellix began. The Xyloth Empire acknowledges that our forces acted with insufficient intelligence and excessive force in the incident at Epsilon Terminus. He turned to face the human platform. Directly, we extend our formal apology to the Human-Terran Alliance and to the families of the 47 civilians who lost their lives. The Empire acknowledges that these individuals were engaged in peaceful cultural activities and posed no threat to Xyloth's security. It was clearly difficult for him to say, and Chun appreciated that he was doing it anyway. We accept your apology, Ambassador, Chun replied formally, and we acknowledge the courage it takes to admit error before the assembled council. Krellix looked almost surprised at that, his scale shifting slightly toward a healthier color. The Empire has also prepared reparations, totaling 240 million galactic credits, he continued. This sum covers the assessed value of the destroyed vessels, compensation for the families of the deceased, and additional educational initiatives as requested by Ambassador Chen. Specifically, the establishment of a scholarship program for cross-cultural education between our peoples. Murmurs rippled through the chamber, apparently. This detail had not leaked to the galactic networks yet. The Xyloth Empire sponsors cultural exchange? The Varelian ambassador asked, her tone suggesting she found this hard to believe. At human request? Yes, Krellix confirmed. Ambassador, Chun believes that education can prevent future conflicts. The Empire is willing to explore this possibility. It is unusual, Chancellor Vornath observed, but not unwelcome. The Council recognizes this resolution as satisfactory to both parties. Therefore, this matter is considered closed. Point of order, called a new voice. Chen turned to see a delegate she didn't recognize rising from one of the platforms that had been empty during the previous session. The being was tall and impossibly thin, with skin that seemed to shift between different shades of gray. Identify yourself, Vornath instructed. I am Ambassador Felinath of the Kryn Hegemony. The figure said, my government has observer status but maintains the right to address the Council on matters of galactic security. Proceed, Vornath said, though his tone suggested he wasn't pleased by this interruption. The Kryn Hegemony believes this council must address a larger issue, Felinath declared, gesturing toward the human platform. The humans have revealed military capabilities that fundamentally alter the galactic power balance. We cannot simply ignore the implications. Chun felt her stomach tighten. This was exactly what she had feared, the threat of human military strength overshadowing any attempt at peaceful integration. What implications concern you, Ambassador? Vornath asked. The humans possess technology that makes their centuries-old museum pieces equivalent to modern warships. Felinath continued. Their current fleet allegedly outmatches anything in this sector, and they claim the ability to expand that fleet tenfold within, what was the time frame? Days, weeks? Our expansion protocols are classified, Chun interjected, but I can confirm that human industrial capacity is substantial. Substantial enough to threaten the sovereignty of every species in this chamber. Felinath pressed. The Kryn hegemony proposes that the Council establish restrictions on human military expansion and require regular inspections of human military installations. For the safety of all galactic citizens, the chamber erupted into debates, some species voicing agreement with the Kryn proposal, others objecting to what they saw as discriminatory restrictions. Chun waited for the initial chaos to die down before requesting permission to speak. Ambassador Felanath raises concerns that I understand, she said once Vornath had restored order. Yes. Humanity possesses significant military capabilities. Yes. We could theoretically pose a threat to galactic stability. But the same could be said of any sufficiently advanced species. She pulled up comparative data showing military capabilities across the Council's member species. The Varelian Confederacy maintains weapons capable of destabilizing stars. Chun noted, the Varelian Assembly has developed biological weapons that could sterilize entire planets. The Xyloth Empire, despite yesterday's incident, still commands the largest fleet in the sector. Every species in this chamber could be a threat under the right circumstances. That is precisely why we have the Galactic Council and the treaties that govern our interactions. Chancellor Vornath added, to ensure mutual security through cooperation rather than mutual destruction through isolation. But the humans are different. Felanath insisted. They come from a death world. They evolved through constant warfare. And they have demonstrated calculation of mass casualties with what appeared to be disturbing ease. You're right, Chun said simply. And the chamber fell silent. We are different. She stood straighter, meeting the eyes of delegates across the massive space. Humanity evolved on a planet that tried to kill us every single day. She continued, we survived ice ages, plagues, predators, and eventually learned to survive each other. We became very good at war because we had no choice, evolve or die. But here's what Ambassador Felanath is missing. We also evolved something else. She pulled up new images, human art, architecture, literature, music, and scientific achievements. We created beauty even in the midst of horror. Chun said, we built libraries while our cities burned, wrote poetry between battles, composed symphonies during sieges. We developed philosophy and ethics and law specifically because we understood how terrible we could be. Our capacity for violence is matched by our capacity for compassion. Our ability to destroy is balanced by our drive to create. And our skill at war is tempered by our desperate desire for peace. She paused, looking directly at Felanath. You fear what humanity might do, she said. That's understandable. But consider what we haven't done. We've had the capability to dominate this sector since we arrived 3 years ago, and instead we've traded peacefully, participated in diplomatic forums, shared our technology, and sent historians with museum ships instead of invasion forces. Actions speak louder than words. Ambassador, judge us by what we do, not by what you fear we might do. Takmur rose from the observer platform once again. If I may offer historical perspective, the ancient Methulan said, the Kryn hegemony's concerns are not without precedent. When the Varelians first joined the Council 6,000 years ago, similar proposals were made to restrict their stellar manipulation technology. When the Varelians demonstrated their biological mastery 3,000 years ago, calls for mandatory inspections were made. In both cases, the Council chose trust over suspicion and cooperation over restriction. And in both cases, that choice proved correct. He turned toward Felanath. The Kryn hegemony itself was once viewed with suspicion for your ability to phase through solid matter and manipulate quantum states. Takmur continued, yet you were welcomed without discriminatory restrictions. To apply different standards to humanity would establish a dangerous precedent. It would suggest that Council membership comes with different tiers of rights and restrictions based on perceived threat level. That path leads not to security, but to resentment and eventual conflict. Chancellor Vornath nodded slowly. Observer Takmer speaks wisdom, he said. Council was founded on principles of equality among member species. While security concerns must be addressed, they cannot justify discriminatory treatment. Then how do we ensure galactic security? Felanath demanded, frustration evident in his voice. By doing what we've always done, Chun interjected, by maintaining open diplomatic channels, by honoring treaties, by building trust through consistent actions. She pulled up the scholarship program details. The Xyloth attacked us, and we could have responded with overwhelming force, she continued. Instead, we offered peace and asked that part of the reparations go toward educating their children alongside ours. That's not the action of a species planning conquest. That's the action of a species trying to build something better. Earth invites any council species to establish similar exchange programs. Send your students to our universities, we'll send ours. 6 months after the incident at Epsilon Terminus, Ambassador Chun stood in a very different setting than the Grand Council chamber. She was in a classroom at the newly established Terran Xyloth Cultural Exchange Center on the human colony world of New Harmonet Winna 5. Students sat before her, 12 humans and 13 Xyloth, all between the ages of 15 and 18 in human equivalent years. Today we're going to discuss the incident that led to the creation of this program, Chan said, pulling up holographic displays showing the destroyed museum ships. The students, both human and Xyloth, looked at the images with solemn expressions. Ambassador, one of the Xyloth students said, raising a clawed hand, may I ask a question? Of course, Chum replied. That's what we're here for. Why did humanity choose education over revenge? The young Xyloth asked. Your people had the power to punish the Empire severely. Yet you asked for this instead. Chun smiled slightly and walked to the window, where the campus grounds stretched out beneath a pale blue sky. Let me tell you a story about a human named Mandela. She began. He spent 27 years in prison, wrongly imprisoned by a government that oppressed his people. When he was finally freed, many expected him to seek revenge. Instead, he chose reconciliation. He said something that humans still remember. If you want to make peace with your enemy, you have to work with your enemy. Then your enemy becomes your partner. She turned back to face the class. Humanity spent 10,000 years learning the hard way that revenge only creates more revenge. Chum continued. Every war we fought seemed justified at the time, but each one planted seeds for the next conflict. We finally realized that the only way to break that cycle was to choose something different. But you still maintain your military, a human student pointed out. Doesn't that contradict the message? Not at all, Chen replied. There's a difference between capability and intent. We maintain the capability to defend ourselves because we're not naive about the universe we live in, but our intent is always toward peace. Think of it like a fire extinguisher. You hope you never need it, but you keep one anyway. That makes sense, the Xyloth student said slowly, but I still don't understand why you wanted to educate us specifically. Because you're the future, Chum said simply, in 20 or 30 years. Some of you will be ambassadors, military leaders, scientists, and teachers. You'll be making the decisions that shape how our species interact. If we can show you now that cooperation works better than conflict, then maybe you'll remember that when the time comes to make those difficult choices. A soft chime interrupted the discussion, and Chun checked her datapad. I need to take this call, she said. Think about what we've discussed, and we'll continue next session. As the students filed out, Chun activated a private communication channel. Fleet Admiral Okonko's face appeared, and she looked concerned. Ambassador, we have a situation. Okonkwo said without preamble. The Kryn hegemony has launched military operations in the Outer Rim. They're claiming defensive actions. But intelligence suggests they're actually annexing territory from 3 smaller species. Chun felt her stomach tighten. Ambassador Felinath's species? She asked. Yes. Okonkwo confirmed. It seems he projected his own imperial ambitions onto humanity. The species being attacked are calling for council intervention, and several have specifically requested human assistance. What does Earth Command recommend? Chun asked. That's why I'm calling you. Okonkwo said, this is your area of expertise. What do we do that demonstrates we're the good guys without looking like we're trying to become Galactic Police? Chun thought carefully for several moments. We help, but we do it the right way. She said finally, we go through the council, we work with coalition forces. We follow established protocols, and we make it clear we're defending innocent species, not expanding our own influence. The council is convening an emergency session in 2 hours. Okonkwo informed her, I'll be there. Chun promised the council chamber was in chaos when Chun arrived. Representatives from the 3 species under attack, the Silith Collective, the Paran Republic, and the Vex Commonwealth were pleading for intervention while Ambassador Felinath stood at his platform, denying any aggression. The Kryn hegemony is merely reclaiming territory that was historically ours. Felinath insisted. These species occupy space that belonged to our ancestors. Your ancestors abandoned that space 4,000 years ago, the Silith delegate countered, her bioluminescent skin flashing angry reds. We've inhabited these systems for 3,000 years. You have no legitimate claim. Chancellor Vorneth looked older and more tired than Chun had ever seen him. This council cannot simply ignore military aggression, he said. However, we also cannot authorize intervention without majority support. The Kryn hegemony is a council member with full rights and protections. Then what good is this council? The Paran representative demanded, his feathered crest standing on end. What purpose does it serve if it cannot protect its smallest members from the largest? Chun requested permission to speak, and Vorneth nodded wearily. The Human-Terran Alliance stands ready to assist the defending species, Chun announced. However, we will only do so as part of a formal council coalition, following established protocols and rules of engagement. We propose that the council authorize a peacekeeping force composed of volunteers from member species to defend the territorial integrity of the Silith, Paran, and Vex peoples. Earth will contribute vessels and personnel to this force, but we will not act unilaterally. Murmurs spread through the chamber. This was exactly the kind of measured response that many had hoped humanity would demonstrate. The Varelian Confederacy will join such a coalition, the Varelian ambassador declared, as will the Varelian Assembly, another delegate added within minutes. 15 species had pledged support for the peacekeeping force Ambassador Felinath. Watch this coalition forming with growing alarm. This is an internal matter, he protested. The council has no authority. The council has every authority granted to it by the treaties that the Kryn hegemony signed when joining. Takmur interrupted from the observer platform, including Article 12, which authorizes collective defense of member species against aggression. You are forcing a conflict that could have been avoided. Ambassador Felinath. The Kryn ambassador's form seemed to flicker and phase slightly, a sign of distress in his species. You don't understand, he said, his voice losing its earlier confidence. The Kryn need those resources. Our core worlds are dying, and we have nowhere else to go. The chamber fell silent at this unexpected admission. Then you should have asked for help, Chun said quietly. The council exists to address exactly these kinds of crises. If your worlds are dying, there are dozens of species here with terraforming technology, environmental restoration capabilities, and resources to share. But you chose conquest over cooperation. She walked closer to the Kryn platform. 6 months ago, you warned this council that humanity would reveal its true nature. She continued, you said we would become the aggressors you feared. Instead, we've spent that time building schools, establishing exchange programs, and demonstrating restraint. Now your species faces a crisis, and instead of asking for help, you're proving that your warnings were projection. You feared what we might do because it's what you were already planning. Felanath seemed to collapse in on himself, his form becoming more substantial and less phase-shifted. What choice did we have? He asked. Our scientists project complete environmental collapse within 50 years. The council moved so slowly by the time they approved assistance. It would be too late. Then let's move quickly now, Chum proposed. Right now, in this chamber. Let's authorize an emergency environmental task force to address the Kryn core world crisis. In exchange, Kryn forces withdraw from the disputed territories immediately. She looked around at the assembled delegates. Show of hands or appendages, or whatever, who supports this resolution? The response was nearly unanimous even. Species that had remained neutral throughout the crisis voted in favor. Chancellor Vornith looked stunned. It seems we have consensus, he said. Ambassador Felanath, will the Kryn hegemony accept this offer? The gray-skinned ambassador stood silently for a long moment. Why? He finally asked, looking at Chen. Why help the species that opposed you, that called for your restriction, that doubted your every move? Because that's what peaceful species do, Chen replied. We help even when it's not convenient, even when the other party hasn't earned it, even when it would be easier to let them fail. That's what separates civilization from barbarism. Besides, she added with a slight smile, in 50 years, I'd like those Kryn students to remember that when their homeworld faced death, humanity helped save it. Just like I want Xylos students to remember that after we had legitimate cause for war, we chose education instead. Trust isn't built through grand gestures. It's built through consistent choices to do the right thing even when the wrong thing would be easier. Ambassador Felanath bowed low, a gesture of profound respect in Kryn culture. The hegemony accepts, he said, and offers its sincere apology for our actions and our assumptions. We were wrong about humanity. The chamber erupted in a mix of relief and celebration. Multiple species began offering assistance for the Kryn environmental crisis, while the 3 threatened species expressed gratitude for the Council's protection.